The grand streets of ancient Rome echoed with the footsteps of emperors, senators, and merchants. But behind the marble columns and golden statues, there were secrets buried deep beneath the surface. Everyone knows about Julius Caesar, Augustus, and the mighty legions. But what if I told you that the real power of Rome wasn't in its emperors, but in the shadows? There were hidden rulers, secret societies, and conspiracies so vast that they shaped the course of history without anyone noticing. The real Rome wasn't just about battles and glory. It was about betrayals, hidden agendas, and a network of power that worked in silence. This is the untold story of Rome. The side that history books won't tell you. The side that was erased from official records, but still left behind traces for those who dare to look deeper. Beneath the city, a network of tunnels and secret chambers existed, unknown to most Romans. While gladiators fought for their lives in the Colosseum, and the Senate debated policies in broad daylight, a different kind of battle was happening underground. There were groups that operated outside the law, influencing decisions in ways no one could imagine. One such group was the Custodes Umbrae, the Keepers of Shadows. They were not nobles, soldiers, or senators. Instead, they were spies, messengers, and assassins who served Rome's elite in ways that could never be revealed. Their influence was so deep that even emperors feared them. And some historians now believe that the fall of Rome may have started with their secret wars. But how did they operate? And why were they erased from history? This story will uncover the secret mechanisms of power in Rome, the hidden players who shaped history, and the truth that was never meant to be told. Are you ready to discover the real Roman Empire? The one that existed behind the curtain? The Custodes Umbrae did not operate for wealth or fame. They were the silent enforcers, the ones who made sure that Rome's most powerful figures remained in control without ever being seen. They infiltrated the households of senators, whispering secrets into the ears of those who could be manipulated. They planted false evidence against political rivals, orchestrated assassinations disguised as accidents, and ensured that those who threatened Rome's stability disappeared without a trace. But their true strength lay not in their blades or poisons. It lay in information. They controlled the underground networks of Rome, listening to merchants, soldiers, and even slaves, piecing together details that no one else could see. This secret flow of knowledge allowed them to predict uprisings before they happened, to end conspiracies before they could take root, and to manipulate elections so that only the right people came to power. One of their greatest operations took place during the rule of Emperor Tiberius. Officially, history tells us that Tiberius became increasingly paranoid in his later years, retreating to the island of Capri and ruling from afar. But what if his paranoia wasn't a personal weakness, but rather a reaction to something far more dangerous? Secret records suggest that Tiberius discovered the existence of the Custodes Umbrae and saw them as a direct threat to his rule. He attempted to dismantle their network, sending spies of his own to root them out. But instead of finding them, his own men began disappearing one by one. His closest advisors turned against him, whispering rumors that he had lost his mind. Even his own letters began to change. Orders he had never written were sent in his name, and policies he had never approved were enacted without his knowledge. By the time he realized that his empire had been taken over from within, it was too late. Tiberius's death in 37 AD was officially recorded as natural, but some believe otherwise. His successor, Caligula, rose to power almost immediately, with little resistance. But what is truly strange is that many of the people who had served Tiberius, the senators, the generals, and the advisors, either vanished or suddenly swore loyalty to Caligula without question. Was this just politics, or was there a hidden hand guiding the transition? Some say that the custodes umbrae ensured a smooth transfer of power, proving once again that true control was never in the hands of emperors, but in the shadows beneath them. Caligula's reign is remembered for its madness, extravagance, and cruelty. But what if much of what we know about him was carefully crafted by those who truly held power? His sudden rise, his unchecked authority, and his eventual downfall all followed a pattern too precise to be mere coincidence. Historians often debate whether Caligula was truly insane or if he was simply a puppet whose strings were pulled by unseen forces. In the beginning, his rule was welcomed. He freed political prisoners, lowered taxes, and even held grand games to win public favor. But then, almost overnight, his behavior changed. He declared himself a god, forced senators to worship him, and executed anyone who questioned his rule. Some believe this was the work of custodes umbrae, systematically dismantling his reputation to prepare for his removal. The secret operatives of Rome knew that the best way to control an empire was not by placing the strongest ruler on the throne, but by ensuring that no ruler became too strong. A weak emperor was easier to manipulate, and by making Caligula appear unstable, they created the perfect excuse for his assassination. The final blow came in 41 AD when members of the Praetorian Guard stormed his palace and ended his reign in a brutal ambush. But there's something strange about his assassination. It was too well coordinated, too perfect. Within hours of his death, his uncle Claudius was declared emperor, and all opposition disappeared as if it had never existed. Some say this was mere political maneuvering, but those who understand how Rome truly worked suspect otherwise. The rise of Claudius was no accident. He was never meant to be emperor. He had been mocked for his disabilities and ignored by the Senate for years, but that made him the perfect choice. The custodes umbrae needed someone they could control, someone grateful enough for the throne that he would listen to those who had placed him there. Under his rule, Rome expanded, great public works were built, and the empire flourished. But was it really Claudius who ruled? Or was it the unseen hand of those who had orchestrated his rise? As history repeated itself, one thing became clear. The most powerful people in Rome were not the ones whose names were remembered. They were the ones whose names had been erased. As Claudius sat on the throne, he must have realized that his fate was not entirely in his hands. Unlike his predecessors, he had not fought for power. Power had been handed to him, and in Rome, that was both a blessing and a curse. He tried to rule wisely, expanding Rome's borders and improving its administration, but he was always surrounded by those who whispered in the shadows. His own wife, Messalina, became infamous for her unchecked ambitions, manipulating court politics to place her allies in key positions. When her schemes became too dangerous, she was executed in what appeared to be a desperate move by Claudius to regain control. But was it really his decision? Or had the custodes umbrae determined that she had become a liability? Despite his intelligence, Claudius remained a puppet. His advisors, many of whom came from seemingly low backgrounds, wielded more power than senators. One of them, Narcissus, had risen from being a mere scribe to controlling vast political networks, ensuring that messages reached only those who were meant to receive them. Another, Pallas, handled Rome's finances, mysteriously making and unmaking fortunes overnight. These were not ordinary men. They were the hidden architects of Rome's future, and when Claudius outlived his usefulness, his fate was sealed. In 54 AD, he died suddenly, allegedly poisoned by his own wife, Agrippina. Officially, it was said she wanted to secure the throne for her son, Nero. But those who understand Rome's hidden power structure suspect something much deeper. The transition to Nero was swift, almost too smooth for an empire that had seen so much bloodshed over succession disputes. Within days, he was declared emperor, and opposition crumbled before it could even rise. This was not normal. It was as if Rome had already been prepared for his rule before Claudius had even died. But Nero, unlike Claudius, was unpredictable. He did not want to be a puppet. He wanted to be a god. And that made him dangerous. The custodes umbrae could control many things, but an emperor who believed he answered to no one was a threat even to them. And so, the stage was set for yet another fall, another shift in power orchestrated not by soldiers or senators, but by those who had always ruled from the shadows. Nero's reign began with promises of prosperity, but soon the cracks began to show. Unlike Claudius, he refused to be guided, making decisions that baffled even his closest advisors. He spent extravagantly, neglected Rome's governance, and alienated the Senate with his erratic behavior. But his most infamous act came in 64 AD, the Great Fire of Rome. Officially, the fire was a tragedy, consuming vast portions of the city. But whispers spread that it was no accident. Some claimed that Nero himself had ordered it, wanting to clear space for his grand architectural vision, the Domus Aurea. Others believed that the custodes umbrae had allowed it to happen, using the disaster to shift power in ways the public could not see. Either way, the fire became the turning point in Nero's rule. After the fire, Nero made a critical mistake. He sought to shift the blame onto a small religious group called the Christians. This decision, meant to divert public anger, instead fueled resentment against him. The hidden hands that had once supported him began to withdraw. His lavish spending and paranoia grew worse, and soon even his most trusted officials turned against him. The Praetorian Guard, once fiercely loyal, began receiving whispers from unseen figures, reminding them that emperors came and went, but Rome remained. The Senate, sensing weakness, declared him an enemy of the state, a move that had never been done so swiftly before. It was clear. Nero's time was up, and the forces that had once raised him now sought his end. In 68 AD, Nero fled, abandoned by those who had once praised him. He took his own life, marking the first time a Roman emperor had been forced into suicide. But his death was not just the end of a ruler. It was proof that no emperor, no matter how powerful, was ever truly in control. The empire did not collapse. Rome did not mourn. Instead, it moved forward, as it always had, guided by those who worked in silence. And as the year of the 4 emperors unfolded, the pattern repeated itself. Power shifting hands, rulers rising and falling, but the true masters of Rome remaining unseen, continuing their work from the shadows. With Nero gone, Rome plunged into chaos. The year of the 4 emperors, 69 AD, was a brutal reminder that the empire was never about one man, but about those who controlled the system. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian all fought for the throne. But none of them lasted long except the one who understood how Rome truly worked. Galba tried to rule with an iron fist but was quickly eliminated. Otho was charismatic but lacked deep connections, leading to his downfall. Vitellius relied on brute force but underestimated the power of hidden influences. It was only Vespasian, a general from humble origins, who managed to survive the chaos. But was it just his military skill, or was there another force guiding his rise? Vespasian was no ordinary ruler. Unlike the power-hungry elites before him, he understood the game and played it wisely. He did not challenge the unseen forces that had toppled emperors before him. Instead, he worked with them. He restructured the Senate, making it seem like a return to Republican values, while secretly consolidating power. He focused on rebuilding Rome's economy, not through oppressive taxes, but by reviving trade networks that had long been controlled by silent players. His ability to balance both the public and private powers of Rome ensured his survival. For the first time in years, Rome had stability. But it came at a cost. True power remained in the shadows, more secure than ever. Vespasian's rule marked a shift. The days of openly tyrannical emperors were over. Rome's rulers now had to work with the hidden forces rather than against them. His sons, Titus and Domitian, inherited not just an empire but an understanding. Those who ignored the unseen hands of Rome would not last. Domitian, despite his brutal rule, learned too late that paranoia alone could not protect him. In 96 AD, he was assassinated in a plot so well orchestrated that it was as if history had repeated itself once more. Each emperor thought they controlled Rome, but the truth was clear. Rome controlled them, and the real rulers, those whose names never appeared in history books, continued to shape the world from behind the curtain. As the dust settled from Domitian's assassination, Rome entered a new phase. One where emperors no longer ruled unchecked, but as figureheads carefully placed by those who truly controlled the empire. The Senate officially restored power to itself. But in reality, it was the unseen network of advisors, spies, and financiers who dictated the course of history. Nerva, the man chosen to replace Domitian, was not a strong leader but a safe one. His rule was short, but it introduced a new strategy. The careful selection of successors based on their ability to maintain stability rather than their birthright. The custodes umbrae had perfected their craft. No longer would Rome suffer from erratic emperors. Only those who understood the game would be allowed to rule. This led to the rise of the 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Each of them brought stability, but they were not truly independent. Trajan expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent, but his wars were carefully managed to benefit Rome's hidden elite. Hadrian, instead of pushing further, consolidated power, reinforcing Rome's defenses and ensuring that control remained absolute. Antoninus Pius ruled peacefully, keeping the Senate and military satisfied while avoiding any radical shifts in power. And then came Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, whose wisdom was admired, but whose reign also saw the cracks forming beneath the surface. The death of Marcus Aurelius marked the end of Rome's golden age. His son, Commodus, was the kind of ruler the custodes umbrae had worked for centuries to prevent. Reckless, unpredictable, and obsessed with personal glory, he viewed himself as Hercules reincarnated, fighting as a gladiator in the Colosseum. while Rome fell into corruption and disarray. For the first time in generations, the hidden rulers of Rome lost control. Their attempts to guide him failed, and soon they realized what had to be done. In 192 AD, Commodus was assassinated, strangled in his bath by an agent of his own inner circle. But by then, the damage was done. The cracks in Rome's foundation were now too deep to repair. The empire that had stood unshaken for centuries was beginning its slow, inevitable descent. With Commodus gone, Rome was once again thrown into chaos. The empire, which had been carefully controlled for centuries, now faced an era of instability that even the custodes umbrae struggled to contain. The assassination of Commodus did not lead to a smooth transition of power. Instead, it triggered the Year of the Five Emperors, 1933 AD, where rival factions, generals, and senators fought for control. The hidden forces that had once dictated Rome's future found themselves divided, backing different contenders in a desperate attempt to maintain order. But unlike before, there was no clear winner. Each emperor that rose was quickly struck down. Pertinax was murdered by his own guards. Didius Julianus literally bought the throne but was executed weeks later, and the empire teetered on the edge of collapse. Out of the bloodshed, one man emerged victorious. Septimius Severus. Unlike previous emperors who had been chosen through careful planning, Severus took power by force. He marched on Rome with his legions, crushed his rivals, and declared himself the sole ruler. But he was not a fool. He knew that ruling Rome required more than just military might. Instead of fighting the hidden forces that had controlled the empire for so long, he absorbed them. He expanded the Praetorian Guard, turning them into a personal army loyal only to him. He purged the Senate of those who opposed him, and placed his own men in positions of power. The custodes umbrae had always operated from the shadows, but Severus dragged them into the light, forcing them to serve him rather than control him. For a time, it worked. Severus ruled with an iron grip, and Rome prospered under his reign. But in his final years, he made a critical mistake. He placed his faith in his sons, Caracalla and Geta. When he died in 211 AD, his empire was left in their hands, but brotherly love had no place in Roman politics. Within a year, Caracalla had Geta murdered, and his rule became one of paranoia and brutality. He executed senators, increased taxes to fund his endless wars, and alienated even his closest allies. The custodes umbrae, who had once been forced into submission, now saw an opportunity. They whispered in the ears of discontented generals, planted seeds of rebellion, and in 217 AD, Caracalla was assassinated by his own soldiers. The empire had survived another tyrant, but the cracks in its foundation were growing wider. The hidden rulers of Rome were no longer as powerful as they had once been, and soon they would face challenges even they could not control. After Caracalla's assassination, Rome found itself once again in the hands of men who sought power but lacked true control. The empire, once a well-oiled machine manipulated from the shadows, was now falling victim to internal strife. The years that followed saw emperors rising and falling at an alarming rate, each one trying to secure the throne, but none truly understanding that Rome's stability had always depended on forces beyond mere military strength. The custodes umbrae had always been the silent architects of the empire's fate, but even they struggled to maintain their influence. With every new emperor, their hold weakened. as more and more rulers relied on brute force rather than careful political maneuvering. The turning point came with the crisis of the 3rd century, a period between 235 and 284 AD where Rome nearly collapsed. A total of 26 emperors rose and fell in just 50 years, many of them meeting violent ends at the hands of their own men. The once powerful elite who had controlled Rome from the shadows found themselves unable to predict or manipulate the chaos. Economic turmoil, barbarian invasions, and civil wars tore the empire apart. The legions no longer fought for Rome. They fought for the highest bidder. Provinces began declaring independence. And for the first time, it seemed that Rome's destiny was no longer in the hands of any secretive order or ruling class. Power had become an illusion, shifting unpredictably between those who could seize it by force. Just when it seemed the empire would shatter completely, one man managed to pull it back from the brink, Aurelian. Unlike previous rulers, he did not seek approval from the Senate or the hidden elites. He ruled with absolute authority, crushing rebellions and reunifying the empire through sheer force of will. He drove out invaders, stabilized the economy, and made it clear that Rome would not fall just yet. But his reign was short-lived. In 275 AD, he was assassinated. Once again, the work of conspirators who feared a ruler too powerful to control. His death was proof that even in the face of chaos, the old ways of Rome still lingered. The custodes umbrae had been weakened, but they had not disappeared. They were simply waiting for the next emperor who could be molded, controlled, and used to maintain their grip on history. As Rome staggered through the crisis of the 3rd century, the empire stood on the verge of collapse. Corrupt officials, warring generals, and economic turmoil had stripped away the stability that once made Rome invincible. For decades, emperors were nothing more than military puppets, rising and falling at the whims of their soldiers. The custodes umbrae, who had once manipulated Rome's fate with precision, found themselves powerless in a world where brute force had become the only currency of survival. It seemed as though Rome's greatest secret, the invisible hand guiding its rulers, was fading into irrelevance. But just as the empire seemed doomed, a new force emerged from the shadows, one that would reshape history in ways even the most powerful conspirators had never foreseen. In 284 AD, a general named Diocletian seized power, bringing with him a vision unlike any before. He understood what Rome had become, a fractured empire too vast for any one man to rule alone. Instead of continuing the cycle of weak rulers and endless civil wars, he introduced a revolutionary idea: the tetrarchy, dividing the empire into 4 regions, each ruled by a co-emperor. It was a brilliant strategy, ensuring that power could no longer be concentrated in the hands of a single, corrupt ruler. But beneath this new system, another transformation was taking place. The hidden rulers of Rome, weakened by the chaos of the past century, saw an opportunity. They adapted, infiltrating this new structure from within, ensuring that their influence remained intact even as the empire itself changed. Yet, despite Diocletian's reforms, the empire remained fragile. The tetrarchy was supposed to bring stability, but human nature proved stronger than political systems. Jealousy, ambition, and betrayal still dictated the course of events. When Diocletian retired in 305 AD, something no emperor had ever willingly done before. It took less than a decade for the empire to fall into chaos once again. Civil wars erupted between his successors, and once more Rome teetered on the edge of ruin. But amid the turmoil, another figure rose to power. One who would not only reunite the empire, but also usher in an entirely new era. His name was Constantine, and under his rule, Rome's greatest transformation was yet to come. Constantine was unlike any ruler before him. He was not just another general seizing power. He was a man with a vision, a leader who understood that Rome needed more than military victories to survive. As he waged war against his rivals, he realized that the empire's greatest enemy was not foreign invaders or rebellious generals. It was its own fractured identity. Rome was no longer the same civilization it had been centuries ago. The people had changed, their beliefs had shifted, and the power of the old gods was fading. Constantine saw what others failed to recognize. If Rome was to endure, it needed something new to unify it. And so, he turned to a rising force, one that had been growing in the shadows for centuries: Christianity. At the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, Constantine saw what he believed was a divine vision. A cross in the sky with the words, "In hoc signo vinces." In this sign, you will conquer. Whether this was a genuine revelation or a carefully calculated political move remains unknown, but the effect was undeniable. He marched into battle under the Christian symbol and emerged victorious, becoming the sole ruler of the Western Empire. From that moment, Christianity was no longer a persecuted religion. It was the future of Rome. In 313 AD, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance to Christians and effectively ending centuries of oppression. But while this appeared to be a victory for faith, it was also a masterstroke of political genius. Constantine had found the one force capable of uniting Rome under a single ideology, something that even the Custodes Umbrae had never fully controlled. With the empire now under his rule, Constantine made one final, monumental decision. He abandoned Rome itself. In 330 AD, he established a new capital in the east, a city that would bear his name, Constantinople. This move was more than just strategic, it was symbolic. Rome was no longer the center of power, and the ancient conspiracies that had controlled its emperors for centuries were now relics of the past. By shifting the empire's focus eastward, Constantine severed the invisible chains that had bound Rome's rulers for generations. The old order was crumbling, and a new era was beginning. But even as Rome transformed, one question remained. Had Constantine truly broken free from the hidden forces of history? Or had he simply replaced one secret power with another? With Constantinople rising as the new heart of the empire, Rome itself began to wither. The great city that had once ruled the world was now a relic of the past, its streets filled with memories of emperors, senators, and unseen rulers who had shaped history from the shadows. The Custodes Umbrae, who had once dictated the fate of Rome, found themselves displaced, their influence fading as Constantine's reforms reshaped the empire. But power never truly disappears. It simply changes hands. The Christian Church, once a persecuted faith, had now become the empire's strongest institution. Bishops and religious leaders gained influence that rivaled senators and generals, and a new kind of authority emerged. One that operated not through assassinations and conspiracies, but through doctrine and faith. As Constantine strengthened his hold on the empire, he realized that true control required more than military power. It required belief. In 325 AD, he convened the Council of Nicaea, gathering Christian leaders to define the core beliefs of the faith. This was not just a religious decision, it was a political masterstroke. By standardizing Christianity, he ensured that the empire's new unifying force would remain stable, free from the fractures that had weakened Rome in the past. But this shift did not come without resistance. The old Roman elite, the remnants of the Custodes Umbrae, and even rival Christian factions all saw the danger of this transformation. Power struggles erupted within the church, mirroring the conflicts that had once plagued the imperial throne. Rome had traded one invisible empire for another. Where once senators and secret orders pulled the strings, now bishops and religious councils shaped the future. By the time Constantine died in 337 AD, the transformation of Rome was nearly complete. The empire was no longer what it had once been. Its gods were forgotten, its capital had moved, and its rulers no longer relied on the hidden forces that had controlled them for centuries. But while the old conspiracies had faded, new ones took their place. The power of the church would grow, eventually shaping empires and kings for the next 1,000 years. Rome itself would fall in 476 AD, but its spirit, its influence, its control, its secrets would live on in a new form. The hidden rulers of history had changed, but their methods remained the same. In the end, Rome had not been destroyed. It had simply evolved into something even more powerful, an idea that would shape the world for centuries to come. Rome did not fall. It transformed, shifting from a mighty empire into an invisible force that would influence history long after its last emperor was gone. History is never as simple as it seems. The real story is always hidden beneath the surface, shaped by forces that most will never see. Keep questioning, keep searching. Because the truth is often far more incredible than the myths we are told.